Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Think Alaska is all snow and serenity? Think again. These 5 true Alaskan horror stories will chill you to the bone. Real encounters in the frozen wilderness that you won't believe actually happened. Stay till the end, and don't forget to subscribe if you dare to hear more terrifying tales. I didn't think much of it at first. I had rented a small cabin through one of those online booking sites for a week in northern Alaska, somewhere past the Arctic Circle, just outside of a town called Barrow, or Utayersvik now, I guess. The dates were June 14th to June 21st, 2025. I knew about the midnight sun, the 24-hour daylight, but I didn't realize what it would feel like to live in a world that never darkened. The sun hung over the horizon, pale and unrelenting, and even at 3 in the morning it felt like late afternoon. I thought it would be peaceful. That's why I came here to hike, to disconnect, to escape the usual noise of life. The cabin was small, maybe 400 square feet, a single room with a kitchenette, a wood stove and a lofted bed. It sat at the edge of a forested ridge, overlooking a wide expanse of tundra, dotted with snow patches and little streams. The air smelled clean, sharp with frost that hadn't quite melted, even in June. When I first arrived, the owner met me at the parking area. A man in his late 50s with a thick parka and a gentle smile. He handed me the keys, pointed out the woodpile and the stove, and warned me about bears and moose. I nodded, more focused on the bright sun casting long, strange shadows across the landscape. The first 2 days were uneventful, almost idyllic. I hiked along narrow trails, watched the occasional Arctic fox slip through the brush, and sat by a small stream eating canned tuna straight from the can, because I didn't want to cook. At night, I would sit outside in the unsetting sun and read. It was quiet in a way I hadn't realized I missed. There was a feeling that nothing moved unless I allowed it to. Even the wind seemed considerate, gusting lightly only when I wasn't paying attention. Then, on the 3rd night, though I hesitate to call it night, the first strange thing happened. I was standing at the edge of the ridge, looking at the sun sliding across the horizon, and I thought I saw something move in the tree line. A figure. I froze. I wanted to call it a moose, maybe a bear standing oddly, but the shape seemed too upright, too deliberate. I blinked and it vanished. I laughed to myself. It's just the light, I muttered. The sun's low angle can do weird things. The next morning I woke early to sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window. I was groggy and cramped from the loft bed, so I stretched and went outside for coffee. The smell of the pine and the frozen tundra hit me first, the crisp, wet aroma that feels alive. I noticed my firewood pile had shifted slightly, not drastically, just enough to make me pause. I stacked it back, dismissing it. Maybe a fox or some bird had knocked it over. By the 4th day, the noises started. At first it was subtle, soft thumps on the roof, like someone walking above me, though the loft was open to the rafters. I checked carefully, thinking it could be small animals, maybe squirrels or birds nesting in the eaves. Nothing. I shrugged it off. Then came the scratching at the windows. Light scratches at first, then louder, persistent, as if something was testing the glass. I pressed my face to the pane and looked out, expecting maybe a moose or a raven. There was nothing. I tried calling it rationally. It's just animals. Wind, settling. But the noises grew sharper, faster, and I started noticing shadows that didn't match the angle of the sun. The trees would stretch long, thin shadows that flickered and writhed in ways that didn't make sense. At first I convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks, the constant sun and isolation doing strange things to perception. One evening, I cooked a simple meal and sat down at the tiny table. The sound came again, scratching, but now almost like fingernails dragging across the siding. I put down my fork. "Who's there?" I called softly, almost ashamed of my own fear. No answer. Then I heard it from the back of the cabin, near the door, a faint breathing, slow and deliberate. My chest tightened. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it into the corner. Empty. I didn't sleep much that night. Every sound, every flicker of light, set my nerves on edge. The sun never set, but my mind insisted on night, on darkness, on quiet. I began noticing the shadows inside the cabin too. They weren't just cast by furniture. They seemed to move independently, stretching along the walls, disappearing, returning, always just at the corner of my vision. On the 5th day, I tried hiking further. Maybe distance would help me feel sane again. I packed a small backpack, took the trail into a deeper part of the forest, and walked for hours. The light was relentless, washing everything in a pale, sickly glow. At one point, I stopped to drink water and noticed footprints in the dirt, human footprints, fresh. I froze. I was alone, or so I thought. They were too small for me, too precise. They stopped abruptly about 50 feet ahead. Nothing there. No trees disturbed. No animal tracks. Just emptiness. I returned to the cabin shaken, and that's when the presence became undeniable. It started speaking. Not in words, but in a series of clicks and low groans, almost like mimicry of human sounds. I heard it outside the window, breathing, then inside, seemingly under the floorboards. I shouted, screamed even, but nothing happened. I ran outside. The sun was low on the horizon, still bright, and I could see the landscape clearly. Nothing. No footprints, no figure, no sound, only the sun and the stretching shadows. By the 6th day, I could feel it constantly, in my peripheral vision, always. When I turned my head, gone. When I looked straight, nothing. But I could sense it, a pressure, a coldness in the air that wasn't weather. I stopped hiking. I stayed in the cabin, pacing, trying to occupy myself. I called the owner. No answer. Cell service was non-existent. I realized I had no one to call, nowhere to go. That night, or what my brain insisted was night, the presence was inside the cabin. I was cooking, and I heard the whisper, a human voice, slow and deliberate, saying my name. I froze, knife in hand. I spun, empty. I laughed shakily, trying to calm myself. "You're not real," I said aloud. "This is Alaska. This is the sun. You're a hallucination." But the shadows on the walls didn't respond to the light. They shifted. They grew. I packed hurriedly the next morning, deciding to leave immediately. I drove the old pickup back to the main road, the tundra stretching endlessly, the sun unwavering, the shadows trailing me. Then, in the corner of the windshield, I saw it. A figure, human-shaped, pale as snow, standing perfectly still among the trees. I blinked. Gone. I don't know what it was. A human. Something older. Something that thrives in constant daylight. I left the cabin, left my trip, and haven't returned. I can't explain the shifting shadows, the whispering, the footprints that vanished. People told me it was isolation, hallucination, sleep deprivation. Maybe it was. But every time I close my eyes now, I see those shadows, stretching endlessly across a sunlit landscape, waiting. And I keep wondering, did it leave when I left, or is it still there, in the unending sun, watching anyone foolish enough to wander near that cabin, in a world where darkness never comes? I never thought I'd be the type to go on one of those weekend adventures that make you feel like a character in a survival show. But there I was, standing at the edge of what locals called the Blackstone Mine, somewhere outside Fairbanks, Alaska. On the morning of July 14th, the sun had just risen, casting long, pale rays across the frozen tundra, though it was actually midsummer, the snow having melted weeks ago. The air was crisp, still carrying the sharp scent of wet pine and damp earth. I was with 3 friends, Mark, Jenna, and Luis. None of us experienced spelunkers, just people chasing the thrill of exploring a forgotten gold mine, with the faint hope we might stumble onto something worth bragging about. The entrance was nothing more than a jagged opening in a hillside, half covered by rotten planks and moss. A rickety sign, faded and flaking, warned private property. "Keep out." "Perfect," Mark said. "Exactly why we go in." We laughed at that, carrying our packs filled with flashlights, ropes and a couple of cameras. The first few steps inside were harmless enough. The air smelled of wet stone and mildew. The mine tunnel was narrow at first, forcing us to walk single file. Water dripped intermittently from the ceiling, and the floor was slippery with mud. Our boots squelched in unison as we moved deeper, our voices echoing off the walls. About 20 minutes in, we found the first clue that this place wasn't just abandoned. It was left behind in a hurry. Rusted mining equipment lay scattered, broken carts tipped over, a pickaxe frozen in the dirt, as if whoever had last swung it had simply vanished mid-motion. Jenna shivered. "It's eerie," she said, her voice unusually quiet, like something didn't want us here. I brushed it off, laughing too loud to convince anyone I wasn't thinking the same thing. The tunnels expanded, forming a crossroad. That's when Luis pointed out the carvings. At first I thought they were initials, scratched by miners marking their claim. But as we approached, it became obvious they weren't just random letters, they were crude symbols, geometric and repetitive, with what looked like human figures contorted in impossible positions. "This is old," Mark said. "Really old, like pre-modern miner old." The symbols seemed to almost move in the flickering light of our flashlights. It made my stomach knot in a way I couldn't explain. We pressed on, curiosity overpowering unease. Somewhere deeper, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber, walls slick with condensation. A thin layer of mist hovered over the uneven floor. That's when the first real warning sign appeared. The smell, a faint metallic odor, sharp and sickening, like rust mixed with blood. I whispered, "Do you guys smell that?" Luis nodded, his face pale. "Yeah, something's off." We set up our small camp in the chamber, telling ourselves we'd only stay for an hour, just long enough to explore and take pictures. By then, the light from outside had faded completely, leaving us with only the harsh yellow beams of our flashlights. The shadows were longer than they should be, stretching across walls and pooling in corners that didn't make sense. Jenna said she felt like she was being watched, and I laughed at her again, but privately. I felt it too, a subtle prickling at the back of my neck, a sense that someone, or something, was aware of our presence. The unease escalated as night fell. We heard it first as a faint scraping sound, like claws on stone, coming from deep within the tunnels we hadn't explored yet. At first, Mark joked, "Relax, it's just the mine settling." But then came the whispers. Not words we could understand, just low, urgent muttering that seemed to surround us. It bounced off the walls, but it didn't echo like a normal sound. It moved, as though floating independently. We decided to leave. Packing up, I felt a sudden pressure, like the air itself had thickened. The tunnel seemed longer than before, the crossroad twisting in ways I didn't remember. Our maps and phones were useless, the GPS read nothing. Even our flashlights began flickering, and the shadows weren't behaving like they should. Shapes that weren't there before appeared and vanished at the edges of our vision. I kept telling myself it was stress, paranoia, the product of too many horror movies. Then came the panic. Luis, at the back, screamed. Something had brushed his shoulder. Not a hand, not fur. It was like cold wind shaped like a hand, deliberate and heavy. We ran blindly, tripping over loose rocks, scrambling through narrow corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly. Every tunnel we tried led back to the same chamber we had left, as if the mine itself was reshaping. That's when I noticed the carvings again. They weren't just on the walls anymore. They were on the floor, etched deep into the mud, forming a trail around us. The figures seemed to mimic our movements, twisting and gesturing in perfect, impossible synchrony with our frantic attempts to escape. Jenna screamed at something behind her, though I saw nothing, only the way the shadows shifted and recoiled. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell anymore. The whispers became louder, insistent, almost pleading. I swear I heard my name, and then Mark's, and then Luis's. One by one they froze, staring into the dark, muttering words that didn't exist in any language I know. I grabbed Jenna's hand, pulling her along, my own legs trembling, heart hammering like a drum in my chest. Eventually, we found the exit, or what I thought was the exit. It was daylight, the sun hanging low, orange and sharp, though I had no idea how long we had been trapped. The forest outside looked normal, peaceful even, but the mine's mouth, it felt alive, pulsing, as though it had swallowed something from us. We didn't speak as we stumbled back to the truck, the silence heavy and brittle. Mark tried to joke about it later, calling it a psychological trick. Luis refused to speak for days. Jenna still wakes up at night screaming. Me, I can't stop seeing the carvings. They're everywhere now, in shadows at the edge of my vision, in patterns of frost on the windows, even in the knots of wood in my own apartment. I don't know what we encountered in that mine. I can't explain it rationally, and honestly, I'm too scared to try, but I know this. Something was there waiting, patient, something that doesn't want to be found, but watches when it is, and I swear, it remembers us. I'm still trying to process what happened, and I'm not sure I ever will. I keep replaying it in my head the way a recording loops, and each time it feels more unreal. My name is Dr. Lena Harris, and I study glaciology. For context, I was part of a small 3-person research team stationed at the Kaskawulsh Glacier in the Yukon for the summer field season. It's remote, uninhabited, and stunningly beautiful in a way that almost tricks you into forgetting how dangerous it can be. It was August 12, 2023, a late afternoon, clear sky. Temperatures hovering around -2 degrees Celsius. I remember the sun reflecting off the ice, making everything painfully bright despite my polarized sunglasses. We'd spent the morning drilling ice cores and mapping crevasse patterns. My boots crunched over the snow-covered ridges as I followed Carter, our camp lead, toward a deep crevasse he wanted to examine more closely. Our third member, Nico, had decided to stay behind at the base camp to log data and monitor satellite communications. The air smelled like frozen minerals and ozone, a crisp scent that usually calms me, but that day, I felt a tightness in my chest, like the glacier itself was pressing down, reminding me how insignificant we were. Carter was talking about the stratigraphy of the ice, pointing out layers that hadn't seen sunlight in millennia. I nodded, distracted, feeling uneasy for reasons I couldn't name. We set up our rope system near the crevasse edge. Carter went first, anchoring the lines. I went next, slowly lowering myself into the shadowed mouth of the ice, and that's when I first heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible over the wind. At first I thought it was Carter, but he was above me, talking to Nico on the radio. The voice didn't have a source, and it didn't belong to any language I recognized. It was soft, human-like, but wrong, distant and muffled, echoing from the depths. "Do you hear that?" I called up, my voice trembling slightly. Carter froze, tightening his grip on the rope. "Hear what?" "The voices. Down here. Someone's down here." He laughed, probably thinking I was joking, or maybe just trying to keep me calm. "It's just the wind bouncing off the ice walls, Lena. That's all. You know how these crevasses play tricks on you." I wanted to believe him, but as I lowered further, the whispering became clearer, more deliberate, almost forming words. I could have sworn I heard "help me," or "don't come closer," though it was hard to tell. My fingers were numb from the cold, but sweat had started on my forehead. Carter started descending to check the sidewalls, and I hesitated. Something about that darkness felt alive. About 20 feet down, my headlamp caught the edge of something lodged in the ice. It looked like remnants of equipment, a metal canister, cracked wooden planks, bits of fabric. Then I noticed frost-encrusted human bones, partially hidden in snow and ice. My stomach churned, and I stumbled back. Carter crouched beside it. "That's old," he said, brushing ice off a jawbone. "Could be from the 70s expeditions. We heard a few went missing." I wanted to leave. I wanted to tell him to leave, but curiosity anchored me. The whispers didn't stop. They weren't coming from above or around us. They were coming from beneath, from the black heart of the crevasse. I strained to listen. The voices seemed to form sentences this time, jagged and broken. Cold, so cold, trapped, and then laughter, thin and brittle, echoing off the walls. Carter started taking pictures. "We need documentation," he said, but I could see the tension in his jaw. We both knew we weren't alone. I fumbled with the rope, trying to convince myself it was just the wind, but the voices grew louder. Then I saw movement, a shadow too fluid for a rockfall, shifting deeper inside the ice. It was dark, darker than the surrounding ice, and it moved against gravity, sliding along the walls in impossible ways. My heart hit my ribs, and I screamed at Carter to climb. He didn't respond at first, frozen like me, until a muffled thud echoed from below. Something had hit the ice floor. We scrambled up the ropes as fast as we could. I remember glancing down, catching a glimpse of a pale hand emerging from the ice, long fingers curling, beckoning. Carter shouted at me to hurry, his face white. My boots slipped, snow spraying, and I nearly fell into the crevasse. Back at camp, Nico was waiting, pale as paper. "I heard screaming," he said, his voice shaking. I thought it was bears at first, but he didn't finish. We didn't tell him everything. Not yet. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing soft whispers through the tent fabric, even though the wind was still. I shook my head, thinking exhaustion was tricking me, but then I smelled it, the metallic tang of blood, faint but unmistakable, mixing with the cold, ozone-like air. The next morning, we returned to the crevasse. Part of me hated myself for it, but I needed answers. Carter went down again, taking more photos. I stayed at the edge, staring into the darkness. That's when I saw them. Figures, hunched and pale, moving slowly in the ice below. Not human exactly, but humanoid. They didn't make noise, didn't blink, just watched us. I swear one of them raised its head and looked directly at me, its eyes impossibly black, absorbing the light from my headlamp. Carter came back quickly, face pale. "We're leaving now." We packed everything in silence. The glacier was quiet that morning, but I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see those shapes in the snow behind us. Even the birds that usually followed the ice were gone. Back at the base camp, Nico asked if we'd seen anything unusual. We lied. We said we found some old equipment and bones, nothing more. But later, when I checked the photos Carter had taken, I saw something. Behind the equipment, behind the bones, a face, not fully formed, but unmistakably watching, pressed against the ice from inside. I left the Yukon a week later, refusing to return, but the whispers follow me. I hear them in my apartment at night, low and distant, just at the edge of hearing. I've tried to tell myself it's stress, but my dreams are filled with ice and darkness, with figures moving just beneath the surface, waiting. I don't know if it's something alive under the glacier, or if we disturbed something that should have stayed buried. I don't know if those figures are remnants of the missing expeditions, or something older, something that has always been there, hidden in the ice, patient. I do know this, I can't go back, but I can't forget. And sometimes, when the wind howls just right, I can hear them calling my name. I keep telling myself to ignore it, to stay rational, but rationality doesn't matter when the ice remembers you. I've been a long-haul trucker for nearly 15 years, and I like to think I've seen it all. Whiteouts in Montana, rivers of black ice in Minnesota, the kind of fog in Oregon that makes you wonder if the sun will ever come back. Still, nothing I've experienced compares to the night I drove Denali Road, or as most people call it up here, the Denali Highway. I'll tell it straight, I don't know if it was real, or if I lost my mind somewhere between mile marker 73 and the Yukon border, but every detail is burned into my memory, and I can't explain it, so I figure writing it down is the only way to keep myself from going crazy thinking about it. It was October 14th, 2019, clear sky, the kind of Alaskan night where the air has that sharp, metallic bite that makes your lungs ache when you take a deep breath. The temperature had dropped to a crisp -12 degrees Celsius, and frost had glazed the edges of my windshield. I had left Fairbanks around 4:30 p.m., the sun long gone behind the distant peaks of the Alaska Range, and I was making my way west, aiming for Paxson before I decided to stop. Denali Highway is notorious for being isolated. Over 135 miles of nothing but dirt road, snowdrifts, and the occasional abandoned ranger station. Cell signal, forget it. Satellite phones don't always work, and the state doesn't even bother plowing the road in some sections until the first big snowfall. My rig was loaded with fuel and supplies for a small village, a routine run I had done dozens of times before. I remember the first few hours as perfectly normal, tires crunching on packed gravel, headlights cutting through the twilight, the radio playing a quiet oldies station. The road curves gently along the rivers, then climbs into the mountains. I had stopped once at a pullout to take a piss, and the air smelled like snow, wet pine, and something faintly metallic, like iron from a creek. I shrugged it off. You get weird smells in the wilderness. The first thing I noticed that seemed off happened around mile marker 82. I saw someone standing at the edge of the road, a man, I think wearing a dark coat, completely still, no flashlight, nothing, just standing there. I swerved slightly, cursed under my breath, and slowed down to make sure I didn't hit him. But when I looked again, he was gone. No footprints in the snow, no skid marks. My pulse sped up, but I laughed it off. I've driven these roads in pitch black. People occasionally walk in the dark, and it's easy to mistake shadows for someone standing there. I passed mile markers 83, 84, 85 without incident, telling myself I was imagining things. Then it happened again. Same man, standing the exact same way, but this time, I had headlights on him for a solid 3 seconds. He wasn't moving, and as I drove past, I swear he tilted his head, not naturally, but in a jerky, unnatural motion, like someone trying to mimic life without quite getting it right. I shook my head, muttering, "Get it together, Mike. You're seeing things." I kept driving. My rig hummed, diesel engine whining, the tires crunching gravel rhythmically, but the sensation of being watched stayed with me. By mile 90, it was dark, full-on night. The temperature had dropped another few degrees. My breath fogged up the cab windows as I sipped lukewarm coffee. That's when I started seeing them. Figures, always at the edge of the road, sometimes one, sometimes two, always still, always just watching. It wasn't until I reached mile 97 that I realized they were moving. Not fast, just shuffling, almost gliding. I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, and slammed the brakes instinctively, heart hammering, lights swinging. Nothing was there, but then I glanced in my rear view. A figure, now closer, just beyond the gravel shoulder, staring. I blinked, gone. By mile 102, I was shaking. My hands trembled on the wheel. I kept trying to rationalize it. Sleep deprivation, maybe. The isolation, sure. Long nights like this can make you see things, but then I started noticing patterns. The figures weren't random. They weren't just standing there for the hell of it. Every time I passed one, it seemed to gesture. A hand raised, fingers pointing, sometimes two fingers, sometimes a palm flat, pressed forward, like a warning. I wish I could tell you I laughed it off. I didn't. I wanted to. But the unease was gnawing at me. I slowed my rig to 20 miles per hour, lights swinging side to side, radio static crackling. I tried talking aloud to myself. It's fine. Just wildlife, shadows, trees. But the words felt hollow, like saying them didn't matter. Around mile 107, I saw it. A trucker's worst nightmare. There, in the middle of the road, was a darkened silhouette of a rig, angled wrong, tires embedded in the gravel, cab tilted slightly, no lights, no movement. At first I thought it was abandoned, but as I slowed to pass, I noticed the driver inside, sitting perfectly still, hands on the wheel. I blinked. There was no face, nothing but blackness behind the windshield. I slammed my foot down, swerving into the gravel shoulder, heart in my throat, and that's when I realized the same figure I'd been seeing was standing on the hood, one hand flat on the metal, head cocked the same way, watching me. I shouldn't have lived through that moment. I know it. My rig fishtailed, but I managed to regain control and floor it. I glanced in the rearview again. The figure wasn't there, not on the hood, not on the road. I told myself it was a hallucination, the stress of solitude playing tricks, but something in my gut screamed otherwise. Mile 115. I was crying at this point, full, uncontrollable, shaky sobs. The radio began to act up, not just static but voices, whispering, murmuring. Nothing coherent, just the rise and fall of voices in a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. I turned it off. Nothing. I turned it back on, whispering again. I threw the radio across the cab. It shattered. The whispers stopped. Then, mile 120, I finally understood. Each figure I'd passed, they weren't random. They weren't just haunting the road for the thrill of it. Each one was standing where something had gone wrong. Works, collisions, death. I saw the empty, shrouded outlines of vehicles long since gone, like ghosts of history frozen in place, and I realized, stomach twisting, that the gestures weren't meaningless. They were warnings. The one-fingered point, the two-fingered stop, the flat palm caution, danger, don't follow. By mile 125, the fear became physical. My hands were ice. My breath was fogging the cab. I kept expecting to see one of these spectral figures step into the road in front of me, and then I did. A figure, solid, fully human in shape, but impossibly still, stood in the middle of the lane. No headlights, no reflective tape, just a dark silhouette. I slammed the brakes, tires bit into the gravel. The figure didn't move. I honked, yelled, cursed. Anything, nothing. The headlights cut a pale circle through the darkness, and when I looked closer, I realized it wasn't human at all. Not exactly. Its head tilted in that same jerky motion. The eyes were empty pits, and my heart dropped because I recognized the gesture. One finger raised, pointing at me. I swerved off the road into the ditch, fishtailed, and prayed for traction. My rig skidded, rolled slightly, snow and gravel sprayed, and then it was gone, just gone. No footprints, no skid marks, nothing. I made it to Paxson just after 2 a.m., my rig covered in dirt, my hands shaking, my eyes refusing to close. I didn't sleep. I called the dispatch. I didn't tell them much, just said the road was rough. They accepted it, probably thinking it was just fatigue talking. I couldn't bring myself to explain what I saw. Who would believe me anyway? I've gone back to Denali Highway since then, during the day. Never alone, never after dark. The figures aren't there in sunlight, at least not visibly, but I still think about them. The way they move, the gestures, the warning I somehow understood too late. Sometimes, I swear I see them from my kitchen window in Fairbanks, tall shadows flickering along the tree line. I don't know if they're ghosts, I don't know if they're some kind of manifestation of the road's history, but I do know one thing. The next time I drive Denali Road at night, I might not make it past mile marker 82, and if I don't, I hope someone reads this and understands the gestures before it's too late, because these figures, whoever or whatever they are, aren't just haunting the road, they're predicting death, and I think somehow they've already decided mine. I've never been one to believe in ghosts or monsters, but what I went through last February in the Yukon makes me reconsider everything. I'm a dog musher, and I've spent years running solo treks across the frozen north. Normally I enjoy the isolation, just me, my team, and the endless snow. But this trip, the one I'm about to recount, felt different from the start. It was February 11th, around 7:30 in the evening, and the sky had a bruised purple hue just before the last light disappeared behind the mountains. The temperature was hovering around -28 Celsius, the kind of cold that burns exposed skin immediately. I had just left my last checkpoint, a small supply cabin, and the wind was quiet, unusual for that stretch of trail. Normally, the gusts whip through the trees, but that evening everything felt still, too still. I was on the second leg of a 5-day solo trek, and my sled dogs were restless, sniffing the air, whining occasionally. I thought it was just fatigue, long day, cold paws, but something about the way they kept glancing over their shoulders made my stomach tighten. I flicked the reins, murmuring, "Relax, boys. Nothing's out here but snow." I'd brought a portable radio with me, mostly for weather updates. Normally it's static-filled in these parts, but that night it crackled to life with voices I didn't recognize. At first it sounded like a local channel glitching, the usual drone of static interspersed with broken words, but then I heard it clearly whispering, almost a hiss, calling my name. "Michael, Michael." I froze, my breath puffing in the cold air. "No, that's not possible," I muttered aloud, shaking my head. My hands trembled on the reins. The dogs stiffened too, ears pricked. The whispers continued, indistinct, weaving between static bursts. I tried to turn the radio off, but the dial spun uselessly, the whispering cutting through the hiss like it knew I was listening. I pressed on, urging the dogs faster. The trail wound through dense spruce, and the snow was deep, forcing the sled to slow periodically. That's when I noticed them. Footprints. Not dog tracks, but human-like, elongated and impossibly deep. They didn't match my own path, and they weren't spaced normally. Whoever, or whatever, was walking through the snow had an uneven gait, sometimes stepping impossibly close to the sled, sometimes disappearing for several yards, then reappearing. I stopped the team. "Stay close," I whispered, gripping the harnesses. The air was so still, I could hear my own heartbeat thudding. The footprints led into a grove of trees, then vanished entirely. I couldn't see anything beyond the faint glow of my headlamp, just shadows shifting unnaturally. I wanted to turn back, but the trail behind me seemed darker, almost hunger-filled. By the time I set up camp near a frozen creek, the radio whispers had become a constant low hum. I tried talking to them, rationalizing. It's just interference, static, not real. But deep down, I knew I wasn't alone. That night, in my small canvas tent, I couldn't sleep. Every snap of ice, every whisper of wind felt deliberate. I swore I saw a shadow moving just beyond the tent flap, watching me. I woke before dawn to find one of my dogs missing. Ranger, my lead. The other dogs were tense, growling at nothing. I pulled on my parka and stepped outside, the snow crunching underfoot. Then I saw it, footprints circling the tent, impossibly large, human-like but stretched, as if the person or creature had unnaturally long legs. And in the center, prints pressed down deep, like something heavy had stopped and stared at my tent all night. I called for Ranger. Nothing. Then I heard it again, the whisper, right behind me. And for the first time, I felt it wasn't coming through the radio. It was real, there in the trees, just beyond the faint light. I spun around, heart in my throat, and caught a glimpse of a figure moving between the spruces. Tall, impossibly thin, dark against the snow, its head tilting in ways no human should. I yelled, shouted, and flung snow, trying to scare it. My voice cracked, echoing into the mountains. The figure didn't retreat, it simply melted into the fog, following the trail I had to take. I packed up as fast as I could, dogs panting, harnesses rattling. Every step I took, I swore the snow behind me shifted, like someone or something was keeping pace without ever breaking stride. I made it to another checkpoint. My nerves shot, and told the caretaker about the footprints and whispers. He laughed at first, calling it a hallucination from cold exhaustion. But when he went outside and saw the prints leading into the trees, his face went pale. He didn't say much after that, just handed me a thermos of coffee and muttered, "The old spirits of this land, they follow you if you linger too long." I left the Yukon 2 days later. I've told people this story, but they assume it's exaggeration or hallucination. I keep the radio on now, but I never turn it off. Sometimes, late at night, I hear the whispering again, calling my name. I know that whatever was following me isn't just a hallucination. And I'm certain of one thing, it's still out there, waiting for the next solo trek, waiting for me. I haven't gone back, and I never will, but sometimes, when the wind is right, I swear I can hear footsteps in the snow outside my apartment window, impossibly large, circling patient, and the whispering that never stops.